Greetings, everyone. For those of you online, we're going to get started. Thanks for those who are joining us here in the room. Welcome to the P&A Senate Professional Development Seminar Series. My name is Chris Apps, and I am a P&A Senator in the Academic Affairs and Provost area. At large, the P&A Senate is the voice of academic professionals and administrators, or P&A, at the University of Minnesota. And if you're interested in learning more about getting involved with the P&A Senate, I encourage you to connect with your senator or senators, or visit USENAT, that's usenate.umn.edu/get-involved. You can also find out who your senator or senators are on that website. Today's seminar topic is an introduction to the ISSS Multicultural Workshops, and I'm very excited to introduce our presenter, Alex Cleberg. Alex Cleberg is an intercultural trainer at the University of Minnesota's International Student and Scholar Services, or ISSS. Alex is a fellow and former faculty member at the Summer Institute of Intercultural Communication and regularly presents at the Society of Intercultural Education, Training, and Research. He has worked globally in Japan and Ethiopia, completed projects in the Czech Republic, Sri Lanka, and Togo, and Uganda. He has worked locally with Somali and Honduran refugees and global student teams from around the world. He has provided trainings for Progressive Insurance, General Motors, and Rotary International. His experience as an improvisational acting teacher and storytelling performer helps him to connect authentically and communicate precisely across cultures. So with that, everyone please give a warm welcome to Alex.
Well, great. Hey, it's great to be here, and I'd like to keep the round of applause going for my boss, Thorin Bjetnadottir, who has a few words about the Intercultural Workshop Series.
Yes, hello, I'm Thorin. I'm just really excited that you are interested in this workshop. We've been doing this for a couple of years. It is something that we offer to all staff at the University of Minnesota, staff and faculty. Mostly staff come, so we just tend to think of it for staff. And it is standalone workshops. You come, we just put them on the web. You come, sign up, and do them, just so that you know that we are in development of more of a sort of a coaching session for a whole year, if you might be interested in that. And that will be, just follow our website, and some more information will be about that there. All right, have a good time. Listen to this presentation by Alex. You're in for a treat.
All right, thanks, Thorin. Let's see, now I'm going to use the other microphone. Using this one now, turning that one off. All right, can everybody hear me okay? Everybody? All right, great. So welcome to the sample series. So usually do an intercultural workshop series, a 2-hour session, like 6 2-hour sessions, and this is going to be one flash 1-hour session sampling some of the different things that we do in the intercultural workshop series. And so I start off each intercultural workshop series, hey, welcome, looking at the data, and we found that building friendships with domestic students is the #1 greatest challenge identified by international students, and then on campus, international students' sense of belonging is significantly lower than domestic students. And so through these two instruments, we measure this consistently, and that's why we designed the intercultural workshop series, so we can improve the campus climate, and especially related to these two measurements for international students. And so a lot of times we've focused the intercultural workshop series or intercultural discussions about kind of what we can do to improve the situation of international students or anybody receiving or crossing a cultural barrier. But oftentimes we don't focus entirely on that we can get lost in the benefits that international students bring. So I created this new this slide called the intercultural edge, and I drew the word edge from the edge effect, when various cultures or various groups or various disciplines come together and actually can create something better and something new. And multicultural teams have been studied for quite a while, but this is some fairly recent research that has shown that more diverse teams, as measured by linguistic distance, outperform less diverse teams. And incorporating additional culturally inherent skills to the roster, an average team could change the outcome of a tie to a win once every 3 games. And what the researchers were researching wasn't wasn't social studies or things where it's very obvious where cultural difference can benefit the overall performance of a team, but in fact, soccer. They studied soccer teams, well, they would probably call it football teams. It was based in Europe. They found that actually more diverse teams outperform that when, even including when the costs for those team members were controlled. So I'm just curious, how do the people in the room here connect across cultures? And we usually have it down to a few ways that we connect across cultures. So raise your hand if you manage students or staff. You're somebody's boss. Okay, great. So the manager-managee relationship is very important and has some cultural components. How about an advisor? So you provide advice and hope that advice is taken, either if your title is advisor or if you're a doctor, nurse practitioner, and you're giving advice. So just by, okay, raising hands, good. And how about frontline service? So you're addressing individual student questions, picking up the phone, answering emails, frontline, more of a frontline role, new people every day. Okay, great. And finally, raise your hand if you have collaborators, if you work with a team. Okay, good. Everybody's hands up. Great. So yeah, think about these particular relationships. Each of these relationships is distinct and has a unique way for culture to influence those particular relationships. And we designed the Intercultural Workshop Series to be very practical. And so keep these relationships in mind when we go through our session today. Anytime we talk about culture, I want to frame it in a particular way. And I'd like to frame it as minor adjustments include all students. So adapting existing approaches to include international students while not abandoning important approaches. And so using our judgment to determine where the balance is between these two items. Respecting cultural differences, while of course not oversimplifying those differences into stereotypes. Somebody can come from a 1,000, 2,000-year-old culture, but still show up as an individual. And so using our judgment to balance between these two items. And then understanding international student needs, while of course appreciating international student contributions to all students. We like to say all students can have a global experience here at the University of Minnesota as a result of our 6,200 international students. And then when I first created this, my colleague Nasreen Mohammed, he said, I don't feel comfortable with the fulcrum being in the middle. And I kind of reflected on that, and I thought, yeah, of course, the international students or ones who are not in the dominant culture are doing the majority of the adjusting to fit in and make the most out of the university experience. And so those who are in the dominant culture, whether that be the University of Minnesota culture, or in general, adjust just a little bit just to invite them. And so as we talk about culture and have an open discussion, let's all agree that we're here to build bridges across cultural difference so we can create a shame-free zone if somebody uses the maybe out-of-date language or doesn't articulate the question quite correctly. And when we speak from one's experience and one's own experience. And yeah, since this is virtual, whatever we say here doesn't leave the room. So interpret that as you will, Zoom audience. So one part of intercultural training is that things can be easy to understand cognitively, but different to really appreciate its impact. And part of the ways we get around that is to do experiential activities. So we're kind of spread out here, but if you could, if everybody could find a partner. So find one partner, except Fran, you can monitor the Zoom audience. So find one partner, and this is called the yes-no. We're going to do a yes-no activity. So determine who's the one that will ask the 5 questions, who will ask the 5 questions, and who will answer the 5 questions. So determine now, do you want to be the questioner or the answerer? Questioner or answerer? All right. So the next part of this is kind of like 20 questions. So find an item in the room, and the questioner will ask a series of yes-no questions to determine what the secret item in the room is. Now, all this is a game we've played before. There's really no intercultural element, but except for this part, this is the intercultural element. Every time you say yes, you have to wag your head this way. Every time you say no, you must nod your head this way. 5 questions. Let's see how that goes. And action. You get 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. Okay, five more seconds. Great, that's it. All right. Well, we've had an experience here trying something that we've done every day of our life, except we're doing it most likely in a different way. It's the yes/no. So, yeah, how was it? Just in the audience, I noticed some laughing. It was confusing. Okay, good. Yeah. Was it confusing to follow the rules, or was it confusing to implement the rules?
Maybe both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, wait, do I understand?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Roger.
Mm-hmm.
No, I thought it was confusing because I wasn't sure once we got started if I was understanding the rules or if it was just a confusion around implementing the rules. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Good. Confusing. Yeah. Why? I noticed some laughter. Why was there laughter?
I was confused at first. I thought you had questions prepared for me to ask, so I had to develop questions.
Okay. Good. Yeah. How was it nodding your heads yes and no in the opposite direction?
That was confusing. Trying to remember, am I saying it or am I motioning it? And
Right.
Just different way of thinking.
Right. Am I saying it or am I motioning it? Right. Which one is right? Yeah. Some people have done this experiment or this experiential activity feel like they're lying. Like, I feel internally dishonest. And other people, it's just confusing. It's kind of lots of things to follow. The body language doesn't match the words coming out of my mouth. So this is just a short example of what it's like adapting to a new culture, where you're doing something right, and that's right every single day in your life up until the day that you move to the University of Minnesota, and suddenly the right thing is now the wrong thing. So the reason we do experiential activities is more to affect the affective, in the cognitive, affective, psychomotor kind of way of thinking about learning. It's to address the affective, and we look at things that are easy to understand, but in fact difficult to practice. And so one of the workshops that we do is called Becoming Aware of Your Own Culture. And so how is this cultural? How is this cultural? Maybe Fran, maybe you can find a contributor online who can describe why this is cultural. How are you? It's a question. Why is this cultural? Why would this be confusing? Okay, nothing yet. All right, how about the live audience? Why would this be confusing? How are you? Why is this cultural, unique to this culture?
It's shorthand. Like it's not a full question because we're asking like, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Right. And in fact, not only is not a full question, oftentimes it's not a question at all. How are you is a greeting ritual. People say, how are you? Well, oh, I overslept, and now I kind of have some digestion issues. I'm adjusting to the food here in the United States, and there's a lot more sugar, and people look at them like they're describing like they're committing a major faux pas. I only asked, how are you? Yeah, it's a greeting ritual with precise answers, which include fine, or if you're working, busy. These are the answers to the question, how are you, a lot of the time. And so just thinking about our own culture in a way of a greeting ritual. Now, if the question had a little bit of intonation, how are you? Aha, now that has a different meaning entirely. How are you means like, oh yeah, now I really want to know, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your health? This is often very confusing for students when they first come to the university here. All right. So who better to describe some of their, knowing one's own culture or knowing specifically about the Minnesota culture than one of our international students. Fabio Hodo will be sharing his story, and I'm going to turn on the microphone.
My name is Fabio, and I'm studying aerospace engineering at the University of Minnesota. I'm a sophomore, and I'm from Albania. I have another Albanian roommate and 3 other American roommates. One of them is from Minnesota, another one is from North Dakota, and the other one is from California. So it is kind of a mishmash of a lot of people in this 5-bedroom apartment. I enjoy it so far, but we do have our ups and downs. I mean, I've never noticed cultural differences as much as this one time where my roommate, he'd just eat and there were like dishes everywhere. And then my other roommate from Minnesota comes in and he's like, he sees the dishes in the sink and he realizes like there's a lot of dirty dishes in the sink. So he just goes like, hey guys, don't you think like we should just try and be more clean? And like my roommate who had just eaten those all his dishes, the Albanian guy, he just looks up to him and he's like, yeah, and just keeps doing whatever he was doing. He had no idea it was like directed to him to like clean his dishes. And then I turn around and tell him something in Albanian. I mean, hey man, it's your dishes, you gotta clean them. And he goes, oh yeah, right. And he gets up and he starts cleaning them. Well, anyway, like jokes aside, it was just like a tiny example of how the Minnesotan guy would actually be so circular about it and not tell him he should do his dishes, and me would just tell him like do your dishes and he would do them. So like basically if you ever meet an Albanian and you want him to do his dishes, just tell him straight away, do your dishes. That's the only way it works. My name is Fabio Hodo and I'm from Albania.
So one of the ways that we also look at our own culture here, or what I like to say is the dominant culture, the culture of those that have power and influence in this region, is to look at the value lens, which is a tool developed by Diane Hoffner-Sapphire. And one of those value lenses she created in conjunction with Young Kim and Simmons is this particular American value lens. So where in this culture we emphasize notions of self-reliance, control, equality, capitalism, law and order, speaking up, and speed. And so this provides an insight as to some of the values that are embedded in the institution itself and the institutions at large. And so to give sort of insight of what students are bumping up against is particular values. Now, just because they're values don't mean they're in fact true, or they're even true for all people. In fact, Minnesota has an exception to one of these particular American values. Anybody can guess which exception? Yeah, speaking up. Yeah, we're known as being Minnesota nice, which is sometimes being indirect. So that's good. And it doesn't even mean it's always true. In fact, I read an article recently where you're more likely to reach the American dream if you define the American dream as getting to a different social class than you were born into in Canada than America. But that nonetheless means it's still a value of the United States and an ideal that we hold, regardless of its truth. So, becoming aware of your own culture is another session that we do, and it forms the foundation of all intercultural competence. Knowing what your own culture is, how you were raised, and it can help you adapt when you interact cross-culturally. And we will have this session January 28th, 1:30 to 3:30 next semester on the Twin Cities campus. So another session we do is called Communicating with International Students. And let's get right into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, or get in right into the details. So it would be a good idea if you started earlier. What's a simpler way to say this? It would be a good idea if you started earlier. That would be a simpler way.
You need to start earlier.
You need to start earlier, yes. Please start earlier next time. Yep. And one thing that we have in Minnesota is something I like to call nice-ish. It's nice-ish. Avoid nice-ish. Nice language often confuses students who are learning English. Here's another example. I would go see your advisor if I were you. How do we make this more simple for communicating to those who are learning it? Go, please make an appointment for your advisor today. Yeah, let's avoid the nice language when trying to communicate across cultures. You might want to take your laptop with you. What's another way we can express this more clearly? Yeah, take your laptop with you. Good. So there's lots of nice ways we say it. And again, knowing that the dominant culture here in Minnesota is to use polite language and to modify the language in such a way that we do sound polite and not commanding or authoritarian. But just know that can sometimes, that makes us comfortable. That's part of the dominant culture here. But that can cause difficulties with international students and those who are learning English. And so we do an entire section on this, 2 hours. April 10th, 10 through 12 p.m. So if you're interested, check this out on the Twin Cities campus. Another session we do are the biggest population of international students here at the University of Minnesota, Chinese students. And so one of my favorite slides in the Chinese student session is this, that shows our 105-year history the University of Minnesota has had inviting and hosting Chinese international students. In fact, some of the first Chinese students were on our basketball team. But who better to talk about the Chinese international student experience than Ben Ma, a Chinese student, and he's going to share one of his important takeaways that he learned while being here.
My name is Ben Ma, and I'd like to share one story with you guys about my dim sum experience with my research group. So last year during the winter, our research professor that I worked for took our entire research team to a dim sum place to eat brunch. This is very traditional Chinese food. There were 7 of us in the research group, and actually 4 of us were either Chinese or has Chinese heritage. So, you know, about half of the people are familiar with the culture. And one of our members, John, who is also an undergraduate research assistant, was my good friend, and he's been helping me a lot in the lab, especially when we encounter some reading and instructions. He would help me because I'm an international student, and also John's also provides some advice and experience about the graduate school application process to me. So a little bit background about dim sum. Dim sum, instead of serving individual a plate to eat, like the American style. There are many little plates that continuously delivered to the round table, and everybody shares a little bit from the little plate. So this is a very this is a very Chinese way of eating Chinese food instead of everybody has their own plate. So when the food comes up and everybody picks up their chopsticks, or people pick up the fork and start to grab a little bit of food to their own plates, John were, frozen there because he didn't really know what to do. So I thought, wow, this is time I can help John with some of my experience here. So I told him that this is a very traditional Chinese way of eating. We're all friends. We're like a research group family here, so everybody can share the food like the family style. You just take a little bit to your own plate and eat it. So everybody shares. So this gives actually me a chance to share something to John and prove my value in in this interaction, in our relationship. It's not only John helping me, but at the same time myself is also helping John.
So often in the Intercultural Workshop Series, we have students sharing their experience of cultural difference and what it's like bringing culture onto campus. And I just love Ben's story just because it just highlights that this relationship between he and John. He was asking John questions, and John was was a cultural informant for the Minnesota culture and the United States culture. And finally, Ben gets to turn the tables, and he gets to be the cultural informant at the dim sum restaurant. And so allowing students to bring their cultural knowledge to add value will strengthen relationships. We also use the cultural value lens. This one is made by Wang and Garza, Diane Hoffner-Sapphire again, looking at particular aspects of Chinese culture that can affect abilities to relate and perform well as a team, including saving face, a focus on family, relationships, nationalism, harmony, prosperity, and hierarchy. And each of these can affect the ability to connect in profound ways. So the Chinese students at the University of Minnesota section is March 12th from 1:30 to 3:30. So if you're interested in coming to the session on the Twin Cities campus, please mark your calendars. Our second largest population is Indian students at the University of Minnesota. And my favorite slide from that session is this one, which illustrates the concept, a very important concept from what I'm learning in India, which is jugaad, which is this is a typical bike, and this is a bike that had been modified to meet the needs of multiple passengers. This doesn't come off the factory like that. Somebody modified this bike to hold all these passengers, and it's just a great example of the notion of jugaad, or being resourceful with what's provided. But who better to talk about the experience of Indian international students than our very own Sumitra Ramachandran.
Hi, my name is Sumitra. I'm from India, and I'm a graduate student at CEHT. My first experience with cultural difference was on my first job on campus at the St. Paul Student Center. So we had this extensive training, and we had like lots of rules and regulations that we had to know, because there was also a postal station. So I was pretty confident when they actually put me at the cash register to the first week and asked me to start working. And there was a supervisor watching over the work, of course. So the first few transactions went pretty okay, but then after that, it was really bad, because every few transactions I would be asking my supervisor to check the change that I was giving out, and so it just went worse from there. So the first break that I got during that shift, I went to talk to her and I said, see, there's this problem. And she said, of course there's a problem, you're not confident, and didn't you review everything? And things like that. So I was like, no, it's not about the job, like, or anything about the job that was a problem, but it was the currency. And she said, what about the currency? I said, the coins. I don't understand the coins. You must understand, I just came here like a couple of weeks back, and I don't know the coins. The small, tiny looking coin has more value, and it's 10 cents, and the bigger looking coin, which is 5 cents, is also similar to the quarter. And then you have names for it, like you have dimes, nickels, and I don't understand any of this. And because it was a postal station where we sold stamps, which were really low value, so people would do cash transactions. So every time I had to count out the change or like take change from them, and it was taking a lot of time because I was totally confused about the coins. So she then understood the problem, and she made these small labels and put it in the cash register so that I could learn. And she made sure that it was there for the next couple of days so that I am more comfortable with the coins. But I think that is the more important part of it, because during trainings or in classrooms, we are given instructions, and sometimes the cultural differences could make it difficult to understand certain things, or there may be a disconnect between what is being told or the instructions and what is being done. So it's always good to ask international students about what the issue is if there is a small disconnect between what is being said and what is being done by them. So that was my first cultural experience here. And my name is Sumitra, and I'm from India.
So Sumitra just does a great job of describing just a reasonable accommodation. And her boss's first instinct was that it's confidence. And not nickels, dimes, and quarters, and some are bigger and some are smaller. And imagine the amount of training that would be necessary to increase somebody's sense of confidence. I mean, that's a lot. You probably have to get a therapist, a life coach. I mean, there's a lot that goes into confidence. But if she were to, once asking questions and really connecting with Sumitra, she realizes that the problem is in fact the coins. And why would the coins make sense? I mean, it's just silly. The dime is worth twice as much as a nickel, but smaller than it. And so providing that reasonable accommodation right there on the cash register is an easy win cross-culturally. So we also use the work of Diane Hoffner-Sapphire, Martinelli, and Shukla for looking at the Indian value lens. And so notions of group identity, status, personal networks and connections, layered communication, and jugaad is very important for understanding work connections and relationships across cultures with Indian students. If you'd like to learn more, we have a session here, February 25th from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So finally, the third largest, and they compete for the second and third largest international student population, is the South Korean students at the University of Minnesota. And so of the slides, this is my favorite slide from that session, and it shows the race, which is the high stakes test in Korea of Sunun. Sunun is a high stakes test that all students take, and various students have privileges. Some get to race with mom driving the car while the students are reading. Others are slugging away here on a bike, and one student is just running with his own 2 feet, and being asked to run faster by somebody there. So just shows the importance of the Sunun and the privilege involved in that is afforded different students in Korea. But to get a better example, let's listen to a Korean student herself. This is Sol A. Kwan in talking about small talk, making small talk in the United States.
Hi, my name is Seola Kwan. I'm from South Korea and I'm majoring in communication studies in CLA. Today I'm going to share my story of culture shock that I have experienced when I first came to America. When I first came here, I was really surprised because people easily make conversations with strangers and willing to the talking to with someone when they first meet. For example, they easily compliments to someone such as I really like your outfit today, or brings a conversation topic really easily. For example, a week ago, I was waiting for the green lights and turning on in front of a crosswalk, and a girl's trying to talking to me like, "Oh, today's pretty chilly, isn't it?" And right now, I'm used to making conversation with strangers, so I said, "Yeah, today's pretty chilly." Actually, compared to Minnesota cold, it's not that much like cold, but I think today's pretty chilly and really windy too. And we have made a really good conversation at the time. But when I first came to States, I experienced a really similar experience too. But at the time, I was really surprised and really embarrassed because I didn't expect someone just trying to talk to me. In Korea, it's not common to trying to talk to strangers or making conversation with strangers. So at the time, I didn't expect it, like someone actually trying to talking to me. Also, I had language barrier at the time, so it's really hard to reply back and maintain the conversations. The reasons that I bring up this story is actually one of my US friends talked to me like he met a Korean guy in class and he tried to talk to him, but he seems like really awkward and he really tries to not making conversation with him. Also, like seems like really shutting down the conversations. So my US friends are really frustrated. So I actually explained him like, oh, actually, Koreans not that much trying to make a conversation with strangers when they first meeting. Also, probably the Korean guy might have the language barrier, so it could be really hard to actually reply back or maintain the conversations. So I think it's pretty good points to understand in terms of understanding Korean international students for faculty, US students, or US people in general. Thank you.
So even something as simple as small talk can create a barrier and reduce the confidence of international students. And so for each of these sessions, we bring students talking about their experience, and with each of them, I work with them to provide a specific takeaway or a practical piece of advice for staff and faculty to take back into their departments and classrooms. We also take a look at particular values within using the Korean value lens. Young Kim, Park, and Diane Hofner-Sapphire created this resource, specifically focusing on the Korean values of human relations, we-ness, social face, hierarchy, the ability to size up a situation, and hard work. We have some great conversations at the series about how these values influence research relationships, employer-employee relationships, and the classroom as well. So if you're interested in learning more, we have the South Korean students at the University of Minnesota session March 24th from 1:30 to 3:30. The other session we do is bridging cultural value differences. So I've started to indicate some of the important values that each culture brings to the University of Minnesota. But yeah, how do we bridge them? How do we connect and make more than the sum of our parts? And so one of the authors I look at to help provide insight is Erin Meyer's work in intercultural team values. And she looks at how culture can affect certain processes such as evaluating, persuading, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. And so in her book called The Culture Map. And just with our limited time today, I just wanted to focus on trusting. Trusting can either be task-based. We trust each other because we work together, we know each other, and that's how we trust each other, or relational-based. We trust each other because we've told each other stories, we know each other's families, we've had lots of dinner together. In fact, Ben Ma also already hinted to which side of the cultural value lens he's on, talking about sharing a meal, family style, and being a family. With his research group. And so with these two styles of task-based trusting and relational trusting, I go through a series of takeaways of how to build trust across relationship, assuming that many people are within the this is the dominant culture here, is more of a task-based form of trusting. And so assuming that, how do you build towards relational trust? Lots of items here, but the one for today is developing trust by showing that you personally care, not that you're personally capable. And so I remember learning this one painfully when I was working as a career coach for immigrants and refugees. And I thought my clients are going to trust me because I'll have my degree on the wall, and I'll have a work plan for them, and everything is set out, and everything is documented, and I have a nice, everything's on the computer there. And I thought my clients are going to look to this, see that I'm prepared, and trust that I'm going to be, that together we can create a plan going forward. Well, it just did not work that way at all. My clients were not coming to office hours. They stopped seeing me. My job rate was getting lower, and I had to radically shift. And so I just started interacting with my clients, just started talking about their family, where they're from, laughing. I switched the power dynamic, so I had them teach me things instead of me just teaching them about jobs in the United States. And so that increased the trust level with my clients, and I was able to do my job better as a result within that community. Gerhard Hofstede is another author that we that provides some insight onto various values of cultures, such as individualism and collectivism, masculinity and femininity, egalitarian and hierarchical ways of decision making, long-term and short-term normative orientation, indulgence, restraint, high uncertainty avoidance and low uncertainty avoidance, and high power distance and low power distance. But the one I want to focus on today is this one. This one comes up a lot with the students that are here at the University of Minnesota and staff and faculty. So how do we bridge to a high power distance culture? Well, first we have to know our own culture, and Minnesota is just radically egalitarian. In fact, even in the United States, East Coast is more hierarchical, the South is definitely more hierarchical. You know, Silicon Valley maybe is more egalitarian, but the Midwest is definitely very egalitarian. So we have students that I ask them, like, what's confusing, or what do you notice about the culture here in the United States? What's popping out? And maybe 5 times out of 10, I get, Alex, I can't, my teacher, Dr., I'll use my advisor's name, Dr. Fry asked me to call him Jerry. How can I do that? He's older than me, he's more professional than me, he has more credentials than me, and he knows more than me. I just can't bring myself to just call him by his first name. And so, so that's one thing that we talk about in bridging cultural differences, especially with high power distances. You can't change an embodied sense of power by dismissing it. Just call, if I just say, just call me Alex, that doesn't change the power dynamic. And so we talk about ways of how to work within this notion of hierarchy, and how that can either bridge or prevent connecting across cultural differences. So the final author that we look at in bridging cultural value differences is David Livermore, and he talks similarly about what we talked earlier, but talks about identity, authority, risk, achievement, time, social norms, expressiveness, rules, lifestyle, and communication in Livermore's book. And so the thing that causes the most issues here on campus, in my opinion, is this notion of time. Punctuality versus relationships. In other places, in other authors have called it being punctual versus not punctual. And of course, people don't define themselves as not being punctual. They have another value, which is more on relationships. So how do you bridge to a more relational notion of time? And so there's several items, but the one I'd draw your attention to today is just spend the time on relationships. If you're going to work with somebody, make sure that you have open office hours, use that time and spend the time getting to know the person personally. If the student is asking questions about your family, don't think it's weird or like they're trying to cross some boundary. They're using, they're spending the time on the relationships. Relationships are almost, and one way to think about it is it's an investment. An investment that you invested time in the relationship, and that investment is going to pay off when you need advice or a favor or to open doors. This is especially confusing. I've had professors say, Alex, a student came in for office hours and they're just talking about family and about the course in general, but they didn't ask about resources to be directed to. They didn't have a specific question they didn't understand in class. And they didn't, ask me to open a door on a professional opportunity. So, so what's going on? It's investing the time in the relationship. It's very important in many cultures across the world. And so if you'd like to learn more about how to bridge cultural differences, we have our session February 12th from 1:30 to 3:30. And so for all of these sessions, we'll distribute these are the times and the titles of all the various sessions that are coming up next semester. And a final takeaway in our time together is you can be the bridge. Lots of over 6,000, nearly 200 students are here studying at the University of Minnesota in undergraduate and graduate degrees. We have probably 1,000 non-degree scholars who are here at the university as well. So you can be the bridge. In fact, you could be the cultural informant. I recently got a kind of disrespectful email from a student who was kind of sassy, and I'm thinking, well, at first I thought, oh, this is a sassy email, and then I turned on my intercultural brain. I'm like, oh, what is it exactly? And it, it was just very casual. It started with, hey, I can't do this. Get somebody else, please. And I'm like, okay, well. And so I was a cultural informant. I said, this is what I'm seeing in an email, and this is what employers or professors would expect on the email. So I stopped. It wasn't about me being offended. It was about me being a cultural informant, because if there's a time and place for a student to make these mistakes, it's here and now before they're out there in the real world. And people aren't going to take time to explain these things. It's here that the students should be learning these. So be a cultural informant. Let them know how are things done around here and how people will interpret that. Try to be obvious. Sometimes I just have to remind myself, be obvious, because it's obvious for me. Sometimes I think, well, something's obvious, and then I realize, oh, I guess I have probably 30 or 25 years more experience than the students I'm talking for. Well, maybe that's not obvious. Or maybe it's only obvious for me because I've lived in Minnesota this long. So, you can be a bridge by just giving yourself permission to be obvious. Here's a hint. It may only be obvious to members of the dominant culture. So be mindful of that. Ask where they're coming from. You can connect what they've done to what is culturally accepted here. I remember a piece of research when Dr. Eland at our office at ISSS was researching the experience of Korean international students. And one thing stood out, it's how can the advisor give me advice if they don't know where I'm coming from? They don't know where I'm coming from. The importance of context and understanding where students are coming from is really important. And from people within the dominant culture here, it's like, well, the reason I can give you advice is because I give everybody the same advice, because that's fair. Equality is fairness. Of course, that's one cultural perspective. Being mindful of your emotions. So with these value differences, oftentimes they're not as obvious as more visual cultural differences. It's not like somebody wearing a traditional garment, like a yukata or a sari, or using chopsticks versus a spoon and fork. It's more invisible. Students come off as not being the right fit, or not serious, or they're too pushy. That's something that I've heard used to describe international students. And so be mindful of your emotions. And just one way to think about it is if you feel offended or you feel insulted by somebody of a different culture, just take a second and think, like, what is it exactly? Like, dig into the email. Did it start off with, hey, and you should? Like, are those the specific words that you wrote? Well, maybe that's just a student trying to gauge the level of professionalism that should be in email. So your anger or offense may signal that your values, your cultural values, are being challenged. And so, well, I got through them. I got through all the slides for today. I was worried if we weren't going to have enough time for questions, but we are. But before I do, I'd just like to thank everybody who's helped contribute to these slides, including my boss, Thorn Bjatnadottir, Lee Thomas, who humbly and very graciously accepted to help redesign my slide deck. Like they were looking pretty hard before, and now they look much more beautiful. And of course, our student contributors who we videotaped: Fabio Hodo, Ben Ma, Sumitra Ramachandran, and Siola Kwan. I'm open for any questions from either our Zoom audience or our audience up here.
Excuse me, what's the best way that our attendees can find out about the next sessions? I know you included what the sessions are there in your slides, but if they're interested in investigating the topics more,
yeah,
what's the best way to do that?
Go to Training Hub and type in Intercultural Workshop Series. I also have a link to our website on the slides as well, but Training Hub Intercultural Workshop Series is the easiest place.
I got another one unless there's anything online.
Nothing online, okay, yeah.
So I saw, because I read it at the very beginning, and that you have some improvisational acting experience. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that has benefited your professional career?
Sure. Some things such as, let's see, let me think. Well, the basis of performing, being a good improviser, and creating essentially something out of nothing with just your team on stage is just this notion of relationships. And so understanding what the game is and what the relationship is on stage and just playing to that. So it's heightened my awareness of what's the relationship, who are we in this scene together. That's really helpful. Working across cultures is reevaluating what the relationship is, especially on the emphasis that lots of cultures around the world place on the relationship. And I just did a session on small talk as well, and just small talk is so anxiety provoking, and it's just so ritualistic. There's just the way we've just been trained to do it. If we've grown up in Minnesota, small talk is always about like the weather, right? And like, you know, people are thinking, why is everybody talking about the weather? They're all amateur meteorologists, and you know, it's just this kind of ritual, this thing that we do to bond. And so just thinking about how things can be different, and how that difference can be strange, and magnifying that is also helpful, and that's a definite improv characteristic. And then just notions of how do we advance the scene forward? How do you make small talk and just not really ask the one question that's going to unlock the relationship, but just kind of advance things forward. And improv training really drives that as well. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, other questions? All right. Well, good. Well, thanks for having me here today. Thank you, P&A Senate, and thank you, Chris and Fran. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.